After almost a decade, Lebanon prepares to elect a new government. Could a new electoral system open the door to political newcomers trying to enter parliament? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Lebanon's election. It's been a tough few years for Lebanon. Its government collapsed twice, the country was without a president for more than 2 years, and the prime minister shocked the world when he announced his resignation, only to retract it a few weeks later. So many are hoping a federal election will bring both change and stability that Lebanon needs. On Sunday, the country will hold its first parliamentary election in 9 years under an entirely new electoral system. It used to be winner takes all. Now it's proportional representation. The hope is that smaller parties will have a real chance of getting into parliament. But some say the new format is far too complicated. So will this new system be a blessing or a curse? We'll have that debate in a moment, but first, here's Sandra Gatman.
It's one of the most turbulent political landscapes in the world. In Lebanon, political deadlock has been the norm for years, with sectarian groups vying for power and Hezbollah vying for influence. Now, after 9 years, people will finally get to vote in parliamentary elections. But this time, there are key differences. Lebanon's huge diaspora community is taking part for the first time ever.
And that's the first time in Australia. That's why we're so happy to get involved in the election in Lebanon, and we hope everyone get where he wants.
There's also been a shift in Lebanon's electoral system.
It's unprecedented since the Lebanese Republic was formed. So this is the first time we move away from majoritarianism toward a proportional system.
It means independent candidates are allowed to stand. And it's made it easier for female candidates. A record 111 women will appear on ballot papers on Sunday. But has the playing field really been evened out? Or will Lebanon's political elites keep their hold on power? Lebanese politics have largely been dominated by two competing blocs. One is pro-Saudi, the other is pro-Iran. Under the pro-Saudi umbrella is the Future Movement, led by current Prime Minister Saad Hariri, and is most popular among Lebanon's Sunni population. Their biggest rival is the Shia group Hezbollah, led by Hassan Nasrallah, whose political and armed wings wield huge power. Lebanon's various Christian groups have split their support. The Lebanese forces have aligned with Future Movement, and the Maronite Christian party, Free Patriotic Movement, aligns itself with Hezbollah. Many predict these traditional parties will win a majority of parliamentary seats, but others are more hopeful that a handful of newcomers could shake things up.
Those 10 to 15% changes may prove very critical, and they may undermine the way politics has been performed in parliament, and they can turn events differently.
Still, independent candidates say they can't compete with the level of media coverage obtained by traditional parties with deep pockets.
Who today is able to pay $1 million to appear in the media? Who can pay $20,000 for a half-hour live on television? Those who are already in power, the traditional parties.
Lebanon's next parliament will have to legislate on major issues, like the country's weak economy, the nearly 1.5 million Syrian refugees now living there, and work hard to keep the country's sectarian tensions at bay. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this further, let's turn to our panel. In Beirut, we have Bassem Shab. He is a member of parliament for the Future Movement Party. Also, Victoria Al-Khouri. She is a political candidate for the Sabah Party. And completing our panel is Lebanese political analyst and lecturer Halim Shabaya. Thanks all so much for joining us. Bassem, let me begin with you, and I'd like to get your thoughts on first this new electoral system. Some are praising it because they say it finally opens the door to political newcomers and more independent candidates. while others are saying it actually favors the wealth of the older established parties like yours, for example. Where do you stand?
I think this new electoral law has advantages and disadvantages. It's a new game in town, and I think the tendency of most people is not to accept a new game very easily without having concerns. But the fact is that the principle of proportionality being introduced into the Lebanese electoral system is something good, and I think it is something novel, and I think it benefits diversity, it benefits minorities, it benefits independence, and I think it has forced certain alliances that otherwise would have been impossible. But has also disadvantages in that having a preferential vote has also made this kind of election, it enforced some sectarian aspects. It made people vote preferentially to candidates of their own sect in the list.
Okay, Victoria, let me ask you, because you are an independent candidate, and there have been complaints that say you don't get the chance to compete at the same level with the media coverage, for example, that's afforded to bigger and more traditional parties with very deep pockets. What do you say to that?
This is true. In fact, this electoral law, you have a very high budget that you can use for elections. So if you are a rich candidate, you can definitely use media better, and you can afford to use all kind of support that you need. The problem is that even for some political parties, they are breaking the law by using public spaces to put their pictures, their photos, their flags. You can see that everywhere, like on the street, on any wall, while it's clear in the electoral law that we have to have an approval from local authority who would decide where to put any pictures or other aspect of the election campaign.
Okay.
Plus, it's very expensive for the television or billboards or any other media.
Okay, Halim, let me ask you, I mean, first on what Victoria was talking about there, I mean, is that unfair, or is that normal that bigger parties would, of course, have more money and therefore stronger campaigns? And also, I mean, why are some of these parties being allowed to break laws in the country by putting pictures in public spaces?
Well, I think in theory the proportional law should be better for independent candidates, but I tend to agree with Victoria in that there is a bit of unfairness. There's definitely unfairness in terms of the media coverage, and this is not something hidden. So, for example, there were articles in the printed press about the price for a candidate to go on TV, and depending on the time, depending on the slot, depending on the program. So it's not something hidden, it's not something that's being contested. And of course, I think independent candidates who don't come from the larger political parties will suffer because of that. So part of it is the media complicity with the larger political parties, and it is in large part due to the fact that the media in Lebanon, yes, we do have freedom, but a lot of the freedom, a lot of the press is owned by political parties, or most of the press is owned by political parties. And I think part of it in any elections, of course, if you have more money, you're going to be able to spend more, you're going to be able to come on the media
But Halim, that
more.
dynamic
and
sounds...
if you're part of a big party...
That dynamic sounds very similar to the United States.
It is, definitely, and I think that's part of why perhaps some of the independent candidates or the new candidates decided to go for the celebrity factor. So there were some celebrities who were asked to join some of the lists, perhaps in an attempt to cover up a bit for that lack of media coverage. I don't know what Victoria's position on that would be, but I think that's mainly one of the reasons why. But in general, I think that it also points out to one of the weaknesses in general from the independents and from the opposition, so to speak, to the status quo. There was, we didn't have a larger party, one coalition that perhaps started to work on the elections months ago, years ago, and was able to kind of engage the public and be able to have a real crowdfunding and get money perhaps to get more media coverage. So in a way, it's partly unfair and on the side of the political parties. On another side, it shows that independent party candidates need to find a way to coalesce in larger groups to be able to compete.
But Victoria, I mean, do you at least feel you have a better chance of contesting this election than under the old system?
Of course. Like, even with all the negative sides that we can talk about in this new electoral law, there is no doubt that this is better than the old one, because now we only need between 8% and 20% to get one seat, let's say an average of 15%, which is much better than needing 50% of the votes to get one seat. That's not the point. It's definitely better. It could have been much better because we have a lot of interrogation mark, and we know that for these elections we have a great chance, and we have like a high percentage of winning many seats in different districts. It's not that the point. It's just that we are fighting against not just money but also power, as I said before, because some political parties and some candidates are just breaking the law and no one can do anything about it. But to face that, we are using different techniques in our campaigns. It's not about getting celebrities. The people that we have who are running for elections are people who worked either on political issues or on fighting corruption for many years now. But also we are using a lot of new techniques and new ways of doing our campaign. Like, for example, to have our training for the volunteers instead of booking a very expensive hotel. What we did our training during a fire camp. We finished that and we spent a karaoke night, for example. So that was a motivation for the volunteers, and we did the training part in the nature instead of paying in a very fancy hotel, for example.
Okay, I'm sorry, Halima, it seemed you had a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a very brief comment about the issue of why are the violations that are taking place in the elections not maybe being followed through. I think one of the reasons that's being cited, and I think it's a very important issue, is that I think the number is 17 ministers from the current government of 30 are actually running for parliament. And the Minister of Interior is also, who's in charge of overseeing the elections, is also running for parliament. So that's one of the major criticisms as well about the current electoral process.
Okay, Bassem, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one should not have a selective memory or selective judgment. Some of those who are running on this platform used to serve as ministers in the past. And now we don't hear any criticism of the parties that they used to be with when they were ministers. And it seems to me that this criticism often is sort of selective. The other point is we've seen some of the independent candidates with lots of money spent in the media. And some of them actually are from the media. So I think the criticism is partly justified, but one needs to take it with a grain of salt. This law is not perfect, and I think we believe in evolution, not in revolution. These are the rules of the game right now.
Right.
The next parliament will have to improve on this electoral law.
What do you think of breaking the laws in this?
Well, you know, you are running in an area, Victoria, where we are not competing with you. Yes.
I mean, in all the areas we can see the same. You know, I'm running in Matan, but Kulluna Watani is in 9 districts, Mr. Bassem, and some of them where we are competing. So the idea is that in these specific districts
but
as
some
well,
of them were
there
in
is
government. Victoria, some of them were in government.
Okay, I appreciate your debate here. However, I think we need to keep this as relevant.
One of the people running with you was in government. Hey.
We need to keep this as relevant as possible for a global audience that isn't aware of all the candidates involved and kind of the minutiae of the campaigning that's been underway.
Yes, Andrea, yes.
Okay, but while I have you, Bassem, I need to ask you this.
There is a tradition in Lebanon of hanging up pictures.
Okay, fair enough. Listen, the fact that your party, Bassem, led by Saad Hariri, is backed by Saudi Arabia has left some people somewhat cynical, given he so abruptly resigned while in Saudi Arabia just a few months back, only to retract that resignation, as we said, once he left Saudi Arabia. He was the one that originally put forth the concept of dissociation, and that got a lot of support, so that Lebanon is not at the mercy of regional powers going forward. How do you reconcile what happened 6 months ago or so with your platform today? How do supporters really feel about your party and its leader in this election?
Yeah, I honestly do not approve with your characterization about the relationship between the Prime Minister and Saudi Arabia. What happened a few months ago, the Prime Minister himself, he said this is something that I myself will disclose later, but I wish that this not to be discussed. So this is not a relevant issue to the elections right now.
Okay.
The relevant issue is Saudi Arabia supporting the future bloc with money? And the answer is no. No. The Prime Minister is running on a platform of educational reform, of political dialogue, of promoting sovereignty of Lebanon. And I think these are the main issues. The main issues that others are addressing seem to be neglecting some of the greater issues that concern Lebanese, which are fairly existential.
And we'll
when
talk
you saw
about
Walid
those as
Jumblat
well.
going around with the Druze community, talking about the,
Right, but let me first,
Halim, but I think
as
the characterization that you provided.
You believe it's unfair. I accept that. I'd like to ask Halim then, as a political analyst, as a Lebanese person yourself, do you think it's a relevant issue, what happened with Saad Hariri in Saudi Arabia and the concept of dissociation that had been pitched before? Does it matter to voters at all in this election?
If anything, I think what happened in last November in Saudi Arabia with the bizarre resignation of Mr. Hariri actually improved his popularity in Lebanon, because if you recall, during that episode, there was kind of a national consensus, even from people who don't necessarily like Hariri, that they didn't like the way in which that took place. And I think in some ways it actually helped his popularity. And I think on that issue it is maybe relevant. I agree with Mr. Bassem that it's not directly relevant to the elections. But I also think that the position of Saudi Arabia, its regional positions vis-à-vis Iran, vis-à-vis Hezbollah, will definitely be relevant after the elections and during the formation of the government, in case there's going to be any sort of political escalation or hardening of positions when it comes to Hezbollah in Lebanon. But at this point, what seems to be fair is that maybe Saudi Arabia really and Iran at this point have, and there's an agreement to leave Lebanon, so to speak, or to support the current presidential settlement of President Aoun and Prime Minister Hariri, and in all likelihood we're going to see a similar national unity government.
Okay. Then Victoria, let me ask you, and this is what Bassem had referred to earlier, that there are bigger issues at stake for the voters in Lebanon. So going into this election, I mean, what are the issues that are really most influencing voters? We've heard the economy, corruption, even refugees. What do you think really matters to voters?
What we did before putting our platform and our program, we had some canvassing for a few months now, and we were asking more than 8,000 people about their priorities. And the priorities that they mentioned were mainly about unemployment, health, and education. Those were the three priorities that people mentioned, and our platform as Sab'a Party are based on that. Mr. Bassem also talked about sovereignty. Of course, it is very important, and this is why Kuluna Watani has this as a major point. But for us, sovereignty is also in our decisions, and this is why we refuse any influence from any other country.
Okay, Bassem, I'll let you respond to that.
Yes, I think these are very valid issues, but as we come to election time, each of the constituencies in Lebanon has a more existential issue. The Sunni population in the north especially still remembers Syrian presence in Lebanon. And the issue of Syrian hegemony over Lebanon still is a major issue in elections. For the small Druze community, all that Walid Jublad did was remind the Druze about the days when there was some oppression of the Druze. The Shia community talks about employment, but they're also worried about Israel and having a deterrence against Israel. We've seen in the mainstream Christian street talk about marginalization. And it seemed that it was a more incentive to draw in voters than the issues of unemployment.
Okay.
All the platforms of all parties concerned do address these issues.
Okay, sorry, Victoria, quickly, you can go ahead.
Okay, please. The issue of employment.
I just wanted to say that we should not divide.
As far as the issue of unemployment is concerned.
Sorry, I was giving Victoria a response. Go ahead, Victoria, quickly.
I just wanted to say that we cannot anymore divide people by their sects. What we are trying to do is to look at them as citizens and not as part of a specific sect and then divide what are their needs. We are all breathing the same air
Victoria,
that is
you
unhealthy right now.
Fears.
It doesn't. But exactly, I'm addressing their hopes right now. We addressed their fears for many years and it didn't work.
Okay, I'll tell you what, we are down to our last minute, unfortunately.
I did not hear anything major about, for example...
I'm very sorry. I'd like to wrap up with you because you are the only member of this panel that is not running for a seat in Parliament. So just as a Lebanese voter, your personal perspective, do you think this new system and this election, first of all, are you looking forward to voting this time? Are you eager to try it? And do you really think it will bring the change the political dynamics of Lebanon that is needed?
I don't think so. I don't think it will change the political dynamics because a lot of the same people are going to be voted back in. As for what I'm going to do, it's the first time, this is the third time I'm voting, and I'm actually undecided between voting for the new independent candidates, Kuluna Watani, or not voting, and most probably I will go for voting with Kuluna Watani. But in terms of whether I'm expecting something major to happen because of my vote, I think not in this elections, but hopefully in upcoming elections.
Okay, Halim, we will have to leave it there.
It will.
I'd like to thank all three of our panelists so much for joining us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, has the U.S. violated both its own laws and the Geneva Convention by supporting the Saudi-led war in Yemen? And British football team Leeds United has come under fire for planning a tour to Myanmar. We ask a Rohingya activist why he thinks the trip should be cancelled. Well, thousands are dead, thousands more are dying, and millions have been displaced. That's the reality of the war in Yemen. And one nation that's playing a peripheral part in that war is the United States. They've been one of Saudi Arabia's biggest supporters in the conflict. But is U.S. involvement in any way even legal? A joint resolution in Washington called for the removal of U.S. armed forces in Yemen, with experts saying their presence contravenes international law. Shoaib Hassan has more.
It's a state that a recent UN report says has all but ceased to exist. 3 years since the war began, Yemen continues to be pounded into dust by a Saudi-led military coalition backed by Western countries, particularly the United States. But that support has been challenged in the US Congress.
We believe that as Congress has not declared war or authorized military force in this conflict, the United States' involvement in Yemen is unconstitutional and unauthorized, and U.S. military support of the Saudi coalition must end.
The Saudi-led Sunni coalition has been supporting President Abdul Rabb Mansour Hadi's forces since 2015. They're fighting Shia Houthi rebels allied with Iran for the control of the country. The UN says the conflict has killed more than 10,000 people and injured at least 50,000. 10 million Yemenis are facing acute food shortages, and fighting has displaced 3 million others. Yemen is also facing the world's largest cholera outbreak, with 2,000 fatalities and 1 million people infected. The bill supported by Bernie Sanders was eventually defeated by a tight vote. It happened days ahead of last month's state visit by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The architect of the war in Yemen received a grand welcome in the US and left with positive reviews. But not from human rights activists and Bernie Sanders. The senator tweeted that the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen with US support has been a humanitarian disaster. But the Trump administration appears unwilling to listen. The White House seems deaf and blind to Yemen's plight, as evident from this latest visit to the region by US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Saudi Arabia's security is a priority for the United States of America. We'll continue to work closely with our Saudi partners to counter threats to this country's security. That, of course, starts with Iran. Iran destabilizes this entire region. It supports proxy militias and terrorist groups.
But international legal experts say the US support of Saudi attacks in Yemen is not just unconstitutional. It also violates the UN Geneva Conventions and must end. Can this argument be used to mount a new effort to end Yemen's conflict? And will the US be willing to listen? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Let's get some analysis on this now. Ona Hathaway is a professor of international law and the director of the Center for Global Legal Challenges at Yale Law School. She joins us now. Ona, thanks so much for speaking to us. It is a tough battle you're trying to fight. Congress did not agree that U.S. action to support Saudi in Yemen actually violated U.S. or even international law, really, mainly because, according to the U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. forces are not engaged in actual hostilities. So tell us about the legal approach you're taking now.
Yeah, so what you're referring to was an effort by several members of Congress to end support for the Saudi-led coalition and end weapons sales to the Saudi-led coalition, which the U.S. has been engaged in for about a year now, since it stopped and then it restarted them. And you're right that the argument that was made was that this was a violation of the War Powers Act, and therefore the president didn't have the right to do this by himself. He had to go to Congress. That argument, I think, fell flat. But what you did see was a great deal of discomfort in Congress with support for the actions of the Saudi-led coalition, and a real sense that Congress's patience is beginning to wear thin.
Okay, but for the members of Congress who voted against taking action to prevent U.S. involvement with Saudi via the war in Yemen, it's about protecting common security interests of U.S. allies and the interests that the United States shares with Saudi Arabia. They see Iran as a very serious security threat to their allies and to the United States itself. So it's hard to try to convince members of Congress that that doesn't matter, that they need to only look at the legal aspects and not see what they view as a wider security threat to U.S. interests?
Yeah, it's a very complicated situation, and I think members of Congress recognize that. Of course, they're concerned with lots of different actors involved in Yemen. On the one hand, there's concerns that Iran may be providing support to the Houthis, although exactly how much support and the nature of that support is really not well known. Obviously, Saudi Arabia has real concerns about the instability in Yemen. There had been missiles launched from Yemen into Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has been an important strategic partner of the United States in the region. And so to the extent that it feels threatened, the United States certainly wants to provide support. So there are a lot of things going on here that help explain U.S.'s willingness to support the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. I think it also matters that it is a coalition. It's not a single state. There are many states from the region that are participating in the operation, and so it doesn't seem like a one-off or a kind of single outlier actor, but a number of states that are participating in the operation, which I think probably lends a sense of concern that this is a real threat to the stability of the region more generally. So I think all of those are playing a role here. Plus the fact, of course, that there's money to be made from the weapons sales. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to get to that in a second, but I want to ask you personally, why do you want to kind of fight this battle? Is it just because you're an attorney and you're interested in how this could work out legally, or is there something more human and personal from your perspective here?
Well, look, I think part of the concern for me personally is you're seeing lots of evidence of massive violations of international humanitarian law by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. We see event after event where civilians are being killed, and it does not appear that they had any relationship to the conflict or playing any role in the conflict. A UN panel on experts has found a number of violations of international humanitarian law. There was a bombing just recently of a wedding, a previous bombing of a funeral. I mean, this is really horrific, and it's created one of the most significant humanitarian crises in the region and indeed in the world. You have a huge portion of the population in Yemen is food insecure.
Right.
Many people are starving and dying as a result of this conflict.
But I mean, is there any precedent for this?
And I think we just, we feel responsible for that.
Okay, but and have we seen this before in the United States?
Absolutely, there's lots of precedents.
I mean, we look back to the 80s when the United States was supporting the Contras. But still, the reality in that is that nobody was really held accountable for the U.S. participation in that war that fought the Sandinista rebels.
Well, and there was a real reaction to that after, of course, you probably know that there was quite a scandal in the United States around the funding of the Contras through some backroom deals. There are many people who were criminally prosecuted over that. And there have been many laws since then that provide that the United States can't provide support to states that are engaging in human rights violations. What we call the Leahy Law requires Leahy vetting of any providing of support to a state that's engaging in human rights violations. So there are a lot of laws that have changed since then, in part because of those events.
But it's tough, though, because
that's part of what we're concerned about.
Right, but and as you alluded to earlier, the issue of just supplying weapons to parties that are involved in severe human rights abuses around the world. I mean, the UK, it's also a controversy there that they've been supplying weapons to the Saudis that are used to take innocent lives in Yemen. It's in contravention of international law to participate in the killing of innocent civilians. Why does it seem this is not being stopped, really, on any level?
Well, the laws are actually pretty unclear, is part of the reason for that. The rules that were created after World War II created a set of very clear rules for that regulate states when they go to war with each other. They don't provide very clear rules for what happens when states are fighting with non-state actors or when states are providing support to other states through financial means or selling of weapons. in their operations against either other states or non-state actors. And so part of the problem here is the rules are just not very clear. And part of the problem here is that it's not clear whether the Saudi-led coalition intends to be killing civilians illegally, or whether, in fact, this is just a failure of training or intelligence or something else. And so there's real questions around intent, which is necessary for this to, in fact, be illegal. But the Saudi-led coalition seems to be clearly engaging in violations of international humanitarian law. And that is raising real and important questions in states that are funding and supporting that coalition about whether they should continue that support.
Okay. Ona Hathaway, unfortunately, we will have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on The Newsmakers.
Leeds United Football Club should not be visiting Myanmar because Myanmar football grounds are soaked to the blood of Rohingya community.
What you just heard there from the head of the Stop Rohingya Genocide campaign is being echoed by other human rights groups after British football club Leeds United scheduled 2 matches in Myanmar. The UN says the Southeast Asian nation is guilty of ethnic cleansing and human rights abuses against the minority Rohingya Muslims. Almost 700,000 have fled to neighboring Bangladesh. Rights groups have urged Leeds to reconsider, but the club's owner, Andrea Radritsani, is not budging. He says the matches will have a positive impact on the local community and even highlight the plight of those suffering in Myanmar. To discuss the controversy, I'm joined here in the studio by Chow Min. He's a Rohingya activist, and he is also the founder and executive director of the Burma Human Rights Network. In Yangon, we have a former member of the ruling NLD party, On Mint, and completing our panel, Darren Lewis. He's a football writer for the Daily Mirror and joins us from Madrid. We did invite the Leeds United CEO and representatives from the club to appear on the program as well. Unfortunately, they declined our invitation. Okay, Darren, I just need to start with you because I want to know that purely from a UK sports perspective, why play in Myanmar?
It's a very good question to which we haven't had satisfactory answers yet, Andrea. Leeds United, they're failing in the championship, the second tier of English football. They're 14th in that division. They've won 3 out of 22 matches. They are desperate to raise their profile. And from the point of view from fans and MPs as well in this country, there is a view that this is driven by money and not by the well-being of the people who have suffered so much over there.
And what do you think, Darren?
I would entirely agree.
You agree with that?
I point you to the statement that was made talking about the money being made on the ground and the football being played on the ground soaked in the blood of the innocent Rohingya children, the women and the older people. Leeds say that from their point of view, they will raise awareness. What they want to do is raise money. And what they want to do is be able to pave the way for a market that they can cash in on in the future.
Okay. Neil On Mint, I can see you disagree. You think there's a good cause for this. Tell us why.
Yeah, I think right now, the international, the misperceptions and then also disinformation. Because you know what? Yeah, of course, I'm really, really sorry about the one who displaced the what you call the Rohingya, we call them Bengalis, and but you know, a very unfortunate thing. Right now, we're trying to the government and then also the military trying to settle this problem, and I think that right now, why we really need the international community. Really need to punish. Why not? The other, like the Syrian issue, the other international issue, why they're silent, too silent? Why that the Myanmar is at the very center of the very, center, and then it's very sad to know that. And then also, right now, government has at I think, a very completed, program for the one who has the one who left the country and then staying the neighboring Bangladesh.
But are you basically saying that Myanmar is being treated unfairly, and that there are other countries that don't get the same kind of negative attention that Myanmar is getting, and this is unfair?
Yeah, that's unfair because that's a conflict. Conflict because the violence started from the Rohingya minorities, and then then after that there's going to be a lot of rumors. That's the misinformation, and then some are very much the problem in that conflict area. But the whole international community, that's of course that's a situation. And then, my opinion is that how to solve the problem, rather than blaming and naming.
Okay, and you think sports should be left out of the politics, basically?
That's correct.
Okay, fair enough. Chow Win, I imagine you were deeply disappointed, at least, when you heard Leeds was going to play in Myanmar. I mean, how do you feel it actually undermines the plight of the Rohingya?
I mean, Leeds United is a legal, independent entity in the business. And in that case, they are seeking money. That is their priority. But as a supporter, and I'm addressing to Leeds supporter in UK, how could we allow our icon, our teams, that totally ignore the principle that the team they are playing, the owner of that team, is the contractor who's going to build Rohingya concentration camp in Rakhine State. And how could we going to support with our money, with our voice, the team that downplaying, and this is shooting their own goals in principle. So I'm very shocked. And I'm very shocked with this gentleman as well, who seems to be heartless to me and saying that blaming international community for not fair with Burma. This is really shocking. I mean, I don't know what newspaper he's been reading and which news channel he's been watching. I'm very sure that he's been watching Burmese propaganda news channels, at least, Then he doesn't know the gravity of the ground, how women has been raped, how people has been killed, how the villages has been burned down, and how the genocide has been committed by these generals, by these politicians in Burma. So this is not the unfair games going to Burma, happen with Burma.
Neo, I can visibly see you laughing at what Chow has to say.
Yeah. No, I just like a genocide. That's interesting that the 700 Rohingya minority left their homes, and we still have like 500,000. If a genocide, it means that you have to clear everything to the ground zero. Okay. And then 500,000 people are still comfortably live, but bit of fear, of course.
I mean, not all Jews were eliminated in Germany. Some were still there, not taken into concentration camps. You wouldn't say that
I think the gentleman need to update his knowledge of the legal side, because genocide doesn't mean to eliminating the total population. Even you kill one person, one human being, also can be genocide. Or without killing anyone can be also genocide.
But even if we don't get into the legal definitions of genocide, I mean, the United Nations has said this is one of the clearest cases of ethnic cleansing they've seen. But Neo, I mean, I'm just coming to understand that you think all of that is a lie, really, that the treatment of the Rohingya, there's nothing to be said about it. So I go ahead.
Yeah, maybe, some cases, that's why some kind of perpetrators from the military, from the police, and from the other community, Rakhine community, have been charged and sent to the jail. Whoever make it extrajudicial killing, and then some kind of illegal activities.
Okay.
So, I disagree with this.
Okay. You know what? Before we get into too much about what is actually happening on the ground in Myanmar, because I can tell you two clearly disagree about what the situation actually is, I'd like to get back to the issue of Leeds playing friendly matches there. And let me go back to Darren for this, because we heard Neo say that we should divide sports and politics. They're two separate things. let sports flourish. Politics is for someone else to sort out. You know, we heard that same kind of talk during apartheid South Africa. And eventually, you know, apartheid South Africa fell not just under the weight of sanctions, but because of the cultural, sports, and art embargo that South Africa was suffering from. Do you see kind of the same elements here when it comes to sports and this issue being raised in Myanmar?
I do indeed. And I think you don't even have to go back too far to see the examples of the societal change and awareness that can be raised by sport. You look at the US and Colin Kaepernick highlighting the cases of social injustice being suffered by black people over there. I think, and you've already outlined it, the United Nations have described what's going on in Burma as a textbook example, quote unquote, of ethnic cleansing. And if players were going there specifically to raise awareness of what is going on, of the people being displaced, of the women and children against whom heinous crimes are being committed, then fair enough. But let's not kid ourselves here. Sport in general, yes, it can work as a force for good, but football, in terms of morality, is very, very wanting. And I think as far as football is concerned, they see an opportunity here to raise money in yet another territory. That's what I have the biggest problem with. If they were, as you mentioned a second ago, going with the intention, as so many others have done, to raise awareness of injustice, I'd be fully in favor of it. Sadly, that's
Neil, let me ask you, I mean, Amnesty International described it as odd that Leeds chose to play in Myanmar, but they said, fine, if you really want to raise awareness, the club has a responsibility then to call for an end to the ethnic cleansing that is occurring against the Rohingya on this visit. First of all, I mean, do you think that's fair? And should the team perhaps do that? Should the manager that arranged for this take a stand on the human rights issue in Myanmar while he's there?
Yeah, I think this is the one thing that's going to be the wall is not all are united, and then but you know some people should have to look at the problem exactly what really happened, because that we should have like an international monitoring and then like a very independent investigation who are wrong or who were right. So and then the very judgment is a very premature. Then everyone is a very uniform. That's the problem. That's a problem. That's not a solution. That's we should find a solution. How we save the human life.
I mean, gentlemen like him who has playing double face, I can tell you something. This is a Burmese military and Burmese government propaganda dialogue. I mean, propaganda method techniques. The way they block all the investigation. They never allow any media to cover the news. They never allow any international body like fact-finding missions, like a special reporter Yang Healy, to visit and investigate in the Rakhine State. And on the other hand, people like him saying that without any investigation, there shouldn't be any, because people who suffer 700,000. Earlier he said 700. He lost 3 digits. I mean 3 zeros there. 700,000, and total population in Bangladesh now is 1 million. And these 1 million people are saying that their experience, their shocking experience. These are the genocide survivors, and they are the traumatized people, and the information coming out from them. And there are a lot of NGOs and experts and international body investigating there. Why don't Burmese government, if this is a lie, these are the lie, why don't Burmese government allow these people to investigate in Rakhine State before they are bulldozing all the evidences?
Okay. Darren, I need to ask you this because you're pretty much the closest to the team itself as a sports reporter. Have you heard anything from the players themselves about how they feel about this? Have they been allowed to express any opinion on this? And I mean, right now I'm hearing actually that the one thing they have said they're worried about and maybe would not like to participate is because they are afraid of the Zika virus in Myanmar.
Well, not only the Zika virus, but also the terrorist threat that exists. I mean, they will play, just to be clear, they'll play in Yangon and they'll play in Mandalay. They'll play an all-star team and they'll play a national team as well. The clubs say, to be fair, that there is, quote-unquote, a minimal risk to the players and to the journey itself. But look, the players are concerned. The fans are concerned. They've been very, very vocal about the potential to be drawn into something quite needlessly. And just to, almost to bookmark the point I made earlier, Andrea, the club say, I feel the club should be making a point. They should be taking a stand. Andrea Razzani, the Italian businessman who owns Leeds, he says, it has never been my intention or that of the club to get involved in a political debate in Myanmar. The very fact that Leeds as a club would not want to be represented in this debate concerns me, because I would think that they would want to represent themselves as a club and kind of make clear that they intend to go as a force for good. They don't, in my opinion. And I think the players are very concerned about that.
Okay, Darren, I will have to give you the last word. Unfortunately, we are completely out of time for this segment. I'd like to thank all three of our guests so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We have traveled for more than 1 month. My kid is sick. I do not know what will happen in the future, but we believe that everything will be better. I hope the United States could accept us to claim asylum, to make us, especially my kids, live a better life.
Laws in this country are a total disaster. They're laughed at all over the world. They're laughed at.
Well, that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Remember, you can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching. Goodbye.